Hello and welcome to episode 9 of No Blueprint featuring Nicole Robertson. She is the owner and founder of Musqueam Productions, but she is also recognized by the Alberta Chamber of Commerce as the Aboriginal Entrepreneur Award of Distinction. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
First and foremost, I want to thank the creator for this moment in time, for these synergy moments. I also like to pay homage that I'm residing on the Algonquin territory, so shout out to our Algonquin relatives. And I'd also like to thank our audience for tuning in and listening. They're just as important to me as the guest. So thank you to all of our audience that are making this happen. And of course, another big thank you to Nicole for, being part of this. And if I can indulge a little bit, honestly, the first time I learned about you was just through your incredible online presence on LinkedIn. And I had to reach out, like, who is this amazing person posting these very important posts all the time? I'm like, I got to check her out. And when I started doing some digging, I was just amazed. And so I reached out. And so I'm really thankful that you were able to agree to be here with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I just want to give a shout out to the territory on which I reside and work, which is on the Tsuut'ina Nation, on Treaty 7 territories, which includes, of course, the Blackfoot Nation and the Stoney Nation as well. And I'm very, very honored to live upon this land that's just so beautiful and majestic, and I feel really connected to. So thank you for having me on. There's so much that that I look forward to speaking with you. So let's open up the floor.
Let's do it. Well, before we do, yeah, for real. Before we do, let me check in with you. How are you doing through these COVID times?
During this time, I would say that in the beginning, it seemed really sort of almost scary. 2020, I had said to myself, there's so many things I want to accomplish because it's a new decade. I put that sort of intentions that these were the things I was going to do. And some of them I'm in the midst of doing, but I would say that because of this worldwide pandemic, it has changed my life in the fact that one, I'm taking care of my mother. She's elderly. And so that's really important. And then, it's just having a work-life balance has completely changed. And I know that one of the things that's really helped me is physical fitness and getting out on the land and getting much more connected to it, even though I live out by Bragg Creek. It's pristine land. Of course, there's bears and cougars and wolves and things that people would naturally be scared of. You just don't think about those things. You just continue and get out and do what you can. And so it's helped me to become, one, much more connected to land base, two, to realize and to be much more involved in reading and writing. I am in the midst of writing my own memoirs and looking at ways of trying to connect with family, language. My mother speaks fluent Cree, so trying to learn much more Cree, telling her just speak to me in Cree all the time, because I grew up around obviously her speaking, but because my father's non-Indigenous, I didn't hear it daily, and so that's one of the things that I'm learning is the Cree language, and it's the TH dialect, which is Northern Cree.
I find it fascinating that with all the episodes that we've had on this No Blueprint, there's actually a common pattern that I'm picking up since you've said it, is a lot of us have actually gone out on the land. And that's a common practice. So I appreciate that you said that. And I think another common trait is we're able to pick up other passion projects that maybe we've been thinking of doing. And so we kind of had some time to be able to dust that off and kind of dive deep, and then taking care of loved ones. So I think those are 3 important highlights about what you shared. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
And so tell us, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
So I am originally, I'm a member of the Matthias Kalom Cree Nation, and that's where my kukum was from. And I have a family that are from Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan. So that's where my mother grew up. And she's a member of the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. And so as Cree people, we always take the matrilineal ways of being. So that's how, of course, our highways were connected through river systems. And so the Churchill River up north is essentially what connects Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba up in northern Manitoba, which is Matthias Cologne, which is Puckatawagan. I don't know if you've ever heard the Puckatawagan song, but there's like an actual t-shirt that says the University of Puck U. And I've always wanted one of those t-shirts, right? I'm not even kidding. I want one of those t-shirts. But anyways, so yeah, I'm from there, but I was raised in Saskatoon elementary years. And then we moved to Winnipeg for a bit. I was brought up in the North End and went to school, good friends with a lot of wonderful people that came out of the North End, including Adam Beach. I would say during that time, like the whole crew in and around that area went on to do really some wonderful things. And there's like, yeah, it's such a great, you know, people look at, you know, you lived in like really, that's like marginalized community. Well, of course, yes, it is. But it really gave me one, you know, a good sense of understanding how, you know, our young people nowadays, and I'm not saying I was involved in a gang or anything like that, but what I'm saying is that I could see how people band together in urban situations when they're young and they need that sort of like, you know, connectedness and being away from their own peoples. I think that this is where culture comes so important, and understanding your own self and understanding, you know, our, say, spiritual ways to our world Indigenous view. That's really helped to empower my story.
You know, it's fascinating about what you said. I had no idea that you have history in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
I'm born and raised there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar. I wasn't in the North End at all.
Yeah.
My family moved from Regina, so that's where my parents met. And when they moved to Winnipeg, they wanted to move into like a healthy urban neighborhood to raise their kids. So I actually was born and raised more or less in Saint Vital.
Oh,
But later on in my like early teenage years, my parents split. And so I moved out, and I moved out to Broadway in between Spence and Yonge Street.
oh,
Right.
wow.
And so I have my own kind of story of rock bottom and, you know, interactions with people in the hood. And that was a whole other situation. But just to relate to what you're saying, in a sense, like I needed to get away and find a different group to find a sense of belonging, to find friends that I could, you know, make a new family with in a way. And I got to just, you know, trace back a little bit. Like both of my parents still love me today very much. You know, they were never unhealthy parents to me at all. They've always showed love and respect. But yeah, it's really cool to relate to you that you got roots in Winnipeg. That's crazy.
I know I went to St. John's right
Okay.
off of Salter Street, and I used to
Wow.
cruise all over that bridge every day. I was just talking to my daughter, actually, who's a teenager now, how I used to cruise to over that bridge to Chicken Delight to go
Oh,
work
wow.
after school, after my volleyball or basketball practice, because I was an athlete, to make money so I can buy like Nikes or whatever it was, like fashion. Even back then, I was like really into that kind of stuff, even back then. So, you know, I was working and also involved in heavily in the athletic pursuits, and that's what really helped me actually to stay away from a lot of craziness that was going on during that time. Anyways, you know, it wasn't as how it is now, but I still go back and visit. I have family there.
Amazing. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about your athlete career, because I think, you know, for those who are looking you up or they know a lot of your track record, your athlete side is hard to come across.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about your athlete career. What kind of sports did you play?
So a lot of it was focused on track and field, you know, short distance running. They used to call me back, and this is totally dating myself, the Flojo of like St. John's, you know, because I had such like, I was always up against this one girl, and you know, like I used to, yeah, be able to run fast, and basketball, volleyball, like everything. And yeah, so nowadays it's like, thank goodness for muscle memory, right?
Real talk.
When you're like, yes, because you realize you get out of shape because you're not doing certain things that you should be doing. Then you realize once you get going, your body remembers that. And it's, you know, it takes, of course, some work, but I'm so happy that I had those times of actually being very focused. And I've done yoga throughout the years, like Ashtanga to Bikram to Hatha to even before I had my daughter, prenatal, and she's now 15. So I'm very happy that I've continued with that at home during this time. You don't have to go to a gym to do yoga. And it's a good way of actually centering yourself in a way where you're getting workout and you're meditating at the same time. So I find it very relaxing.
True. And so, Nicole, you are an entrepreneur, not just by trade, but also you have a family history of entrepreneurs. Your grandfather actually was also an entrepreneur, Angus Bear, and he received the Saskatchewan Order of Merit. So please indulge us a little bit about his story of entrepreneurship.
So my Moshum, Angus Bear Senior, like the bear name, that's where I actually named my company Musqua, meaning bear and Cree. Because I wanted to pay homage to my Moshum, who back in the day, in the early like 1920s, 30s, had assisted one to be a messenger on snowshoes for like mail and like messaging, like letters and stuff. And so from there, he came to work with some people that had come into the north that weren't originally from there, and helped to guide them in that area. And essentially in that time, it was like the north was opening up. And so he seen an opportunity because he knew that this was going to continue on, where it was just gonna, you know, more and more people were going to be moving up north. So he essentially helped to get more of his people, which are essentially Sandy Bay, Peter Ballantyne, Cree Nation area, which includes like Pelican Narrows and northern Saskatchewan, Sandy Bay, and all that area, to assist with Island Falls, and which is now like it's a power dam. And that was going ahead regardless, with the Hudson's Bay Mining and Smelting Company. I look back at that history and I think to myself that my grandfather, my people, they should have owned some of that power. They did not have that power for 25 years after that switch was actually turned on. And there was a whole non-Indigenous community that lived just upriver, that were non-Indigenous, that were helping to get that dam running. And essentially, it was just, to this day, that's something that still needs to be sort of reckoned with, and in a good way. Like, I'm not trying to say that there's always positive negatives to everything. And I realize in this landscape that we're in, that it's important that we look at the true history of Canada. And these are one of those stories where we go, okay, you know, even with the Bay, when I know that there's many First Nations that understand, you know, trapping, hunting was essentially how the Bay first got their money, from pelts, beaver pelts, and lynx, and everything that you can imagine, right? And so our people should have had shares in that company. We all should have been essentially shareholders of the Bay. And that was one of our institutions. And I look at that, and I've done a lot of research on what occurred during that time. And it's really mind-boggling how our people to this day still don't, there's maybe a handful, or maybe a little bit more than that, that are actually shareholders of actual bigger companies, you know. I think that we need to move in and look at ways of, I'm not saying like full on pure capitalist. What I'm saying is that this wealth could be redistributed to areas that we need money in for, say, much more prevention for missing and murdered Indigenous women, for looking at housing, looking at roots of poverty, and how do we bring our people up to a standard of living where they're not suffering and our children aren't suffering. And that's really at the very, root of things, trying to eradicate poverty.
I really strongly believe that economic development can be a form of how Indigenous people achieve self-determination. I think the more that we are in all facets of society, the more that we can determine what our communities look like. And especially if we're owning businesses, I think that provides us an economic opportunity of finances to be able to invest into infrastructure, which is a huge budget number when it comes to our First Nation community. So I totally agree with you when it comes to economic development, investing into businesses, owning things. I think that's a way that Indigenous people can achieve self-determination. And so I wanted to know, just continue to trace a little bit back in your history. When did you start learning about your identity and who you are as a human being? Because you're so well versed in your history. So I'm curious to know.
So I would say from the time I could actually talk or listen, I just remember my parents always saying, and this was a great thing about being, and I don't consider myself, in the, when I was growing up, essentially, I knew that I was what they would call a half breed. Right. And right now that term is like completely like, politically wrong. But I, at that time, knew my dad, who's non-Indigenous, said, don't ever deny your ancestry. You should be proud of being Cree, back then. And it was like Native and Scottish. There's so many, same sort of, understanding and my mom too as well, and I knew that they being in an interracial marriage, because they were married for over 30 years, got married very young, and they got married, I believe, in 69 or something. So during that time, it was really not a cool thing, right? So they ran into a lot of issues. And so that was embedded in them when they had their children, and essentially said, you know what? You need to overcome this. You're going to actually go against the grain. There's going to be some issues that might come up, but this is how you deal with them. And I always knew it as a young kid, because I was always I'm the youngest of three girls, that I was always the darkest, and I used to get called everything, like, I don't know, I don't even want to go down that road, but I always knew that, that I wasn't, I was different, obviously, and that I was First Nation, but Native, and my mom speaking Cree, like I always knew that was just a part of it. And then of course, my mom and how she is, my aunts would come over, people would visit, there would always be gifting. And so that's one of the things that for me is really important when people come and visit, if they know me, that I, give things away, because that's one of our ways of being, is that, if someone's come all the way from wherever they've come from to come visit you, you give them something in return. And so it's that idea of not being so tied to material things, and some of the awesome, like fashionable things, I always look back, I'm like, where did that go? Oh, that's right, I gave that away. I'm like, oh, it's okay. I'm like, it's like, things come and go all the time. People don't. And so you have to treat them with like love, gratitude, respect, all those things.
Things come and go all the time, but people don't.
Yeah.
Whoa, I like that.
And
and speaking of people, is there anybody in your early childhood, friends of yours, that influenced your career earlier on? Is there any childhood friends that have influenced your career?
I would say absolutely. There's been some, I would say more into my teen years. I have to give a big shout out to Betty and Adam at the Star Phoenix. She and a couple of other Indigenous reporters had put together a Native weekend, or Native journalism weekend, for students that were in high school. And so we got to stay in dorms, and we went to CTV Saskatoon and CGS, I forget, the radio station, and also the Star Phoenix. And essentially we spent 3 days together. And, you know, it was such a sort of life-changing event, because I realized, and it's funny, years later on, where I was having a press conference and I ran into her because she was still working with the Star Phoenix, and she's such a beautiful lady. You know, she's attended to actually do the story, write the story, and here we are, you know, as women now. And she's like, I'm so proud to see you're still in this area. And that was one really heartwarming, you know, story to share. The other one, of course, is that I grew up with the late Neil Stonechild. He was a family friend. My parents were friends with his parents, really close friends. And it was such a really tragic loss during a time when I was about 14. And I knew back then, because I'd heard through his family and his mom, who was such a really good mom and still is a wonderful lady, that, you know, something had happened. They already knew at that time that it wasn't what it was, what they were being told what it was. And so, of course, it turned out to be that that he was with the police that night. And it really made me realize that, you know, this whole thing around police brutality, I knew at 14, I had that lived experience that there's a two-tier system in the justice system in Canada. And how am I going to change this? What am I going to do so that this doesn't happen again, that I'm not, you know, fearful, or, you know, other of my friends don't go missing like this. And, you know, how can I make that change to make a difference? And so that was, yeah.
Making a change to make a difference, I think, is a great transition here, because early in your career, you were also a liaison between CTV, which was founded in 1961, and APTN, which launched in 1992. But then that was just for northern communities, and then later received in 1999 a national broadcasting license. And then APTN became the world's first Indigenous national broadcaster. And you actually liaison between CTV and APTN. So I wanted to know, what did you learn from that experience about the narrative between mainstream media and Indigenous media?
First of all, big props to you for doing your research. I absolutely am shocked, because I'm not saying not everyone doesn't do the research, but nowadays it just seems like it's like real sort of, yeah, you've done your research. So
respect.
Hi to you.
To
yeah,
you.
no, I have a lot of respect. So that's, yeah, no, I had learned, number one, I'd come face to face with one of my role models, which is Lloyd Robertson.
Right.
And we share the same last name. So working out of a national newsroom in Toronto was completely, people work their whole lives to get to that A market in television when they're trying to, you know, get to a place of, you know, working nationally. And so for me, it was such a dream to be working at, I think I was 25 at that time, I believe, or 26. And so it was such a dream at that time, because I learned that during that time that there was so much technology that I didn't know about. Say, for instance, they had a system called Gateway, which is a fiber optic, you know, full on, just dedicated for television news, that you could get your stories sent. And so APTN at that time had that distinct, you know, relationship with them, so that I would be sending, you know, B-roll, which is of course visuals, to Winnipeg. And so I learned those technical things. And then of course I learned the humility, even with Lloyd Robertson. He'd come in every day, he'd say, hey boss, what's on for today? And it was a woman that was younger, and she was the executive producer. Now she's running the whole news team there, Wendy Freeman. And I have lots of respect for her as well. And so, you know, these people that help to shape, you know, some of, you know, who I am today, I just think it's absolutely amazing to see how a national news comes together from a mainstream perspective, but also an Indigenous news perspective. And it was so cool back then to be a part of the very first sort of group of young Indigenous journalists that were working to make a national news team work. And it was a good time.
You make it sound so bittersweet, Nicole.
Yes.
And I'm sure there was some challenges between those two narratives. Did you come across any friction between those two narratives, mainstream and Indigenous media?
I would say that absolutely. When I worked in mainstream, you know, I felt like a saleswoman, and not specifically now talking about CTV, but talking about some other mainstream news that I worked in newsrooms, and you know, was always pitching the idea of, well, why don't we do this story, you know, in our community about, you know, First Nations, blah blah blah, and then I'd be told, well, why would Canadians want to know about this? How does it concern them? Like, really, you know? And I had a news director at one time even tell me, I know your people. I've been to a powwow. I completely get it. And I'm looking at him thinking, no, you don't actually. And so I've had, you know, some times where I've literally had to not get completely angry and like yell and stuff, because there was yeah, very high stressful moments. And you know, other times where I realized right down to the second, like stressful moments of getting your news, because you started in the morning with a 8 a.m., you know, news meeting, pitching ideas. If they don't take your ideas, it's like, here's your story, you're doing this. Wow. You go out with a camera person, you're out, you're back, you're cutting your story, voiceover, getting it 90 seconds. They call it a buck and a half. Then it's like on a master thing, master control, boom. It's like, it's all happens. And then you're done for the day. Wow. And then it's back to the same thing. But the great thing about all that, I got to work, I would say, on a show that really helped to teach me some of the much more bigger stories, cultural stories that really had an impact on my career. And that was with the Sharing Circle. And I think a lot of people know Lisa Meaches, who yes. now is the executive producer of Manitowoc and has a long list of, you know, she's done a lot in this area of production and producing, and other people that I've worked with too. I just want to make a mention too is, you know, I worked outside of that in film with Tina Keeper, and there's a lot of great people actually now, I come to think, in Winnipeg that have really done a lot. And I could see why our national you know, news is stationed there with the Aboriginal People's Television Network. You know, it's there's so many talented people, and even now younger people, and even people that are entering, that have just started their careers in journalism and are maybe at the height of storytelling. You know, I look at those people and I think this is great that they're continuing on with something that even before my time, you know, I look up to people that had television shows even before I had started in news. And I know that it's just, it's endless, and you're doing a wonderful job. Like, look at the new platforms we have in podcasting and that. So I give, you know, my hat off, or my feather to all you that are doing well and continuing on with our storytelling and our natural abilities to communicate. Because I always say that, you know, our people are such good, you know, good storytellers and humorous too. Like, I've been around a lot of people that are really good at telling stories. And my late friend who I worked with as his executive assistant in communications and office manager, Jason Goodstriker, you know, I had worked with him, and, you know, my heart goes out to the family. You know, they just lost him this past year, and he was such a great storyteller, and, you know, like he had so many great things to offer. And I just look at it now and I think to myself, life is really short. You really have to take, you know, take it every day and make the best of it. Some days aren't like completely go, go, go. I think there's a misconception around, you know, that even during this time of being in COVID, you realize, you know, people have come to this place of, well, who am I without these titles? You know, it's come down to that simplistic one question, right? In the beginning, everyone, I think, was having sort of a, not everyone, but some people were having this sort of, what could I be doing? Like, oh my goodness, I'm not getting in a car and getting downtown, and, you know, all these things that sort of give people identities and a sense of self, you know? And so we all had to come to this place of calming down and going, what really matters?
I love that. And I think on that note, like the planet needed that. The planet needed to slow down. The planet needed a break.
Yes.
And that's what's so fascinating. I was at the dinner table with my family last weekend, and we were talking a little bit about this, how the planet has recovered during COVID. And we thought it was really interesting that because there's less planes in the air, it's actually harder to determine the weather. So we're just making the connection of how much our Mother Earth has a chance to breathe. And I think that topic of breathing is so relevant considering our times. And so I think you bringing that up makes so much sense. And I think it's important. And your work, you've worked with so many incredible people. And some of that involved a number of chiefs. And Chief Teresa Spence, to name one of them, during her hunger strike. And that was during the Idle No More movement back in December 2012. And that work that you did involved bringing a lot of chiefs into Parliament to address legislation that impacted Indigenous peoples. So I wanted to know, what did that, like, how important is it for Indigenous people to be involved in politics?
I would say that it is as important as us being storytellers, and it's as important as anything else. It's really high on my radar. And the reason being is that, you know, being there firsthand, and how I actually first got started working actually with her was I was working with Chief Wallace Fox of Onion Lake Cree Nation. And he was the one that essentially had said, you know, at the Chiefs meeting, why are we all sitting here when the future of our future grandchildren are at stake with the omnibus bill that they're about to pass? And it's going to really affect lands, water, and the air we breathe. We need to be speaking to the people across in Parliament. So that's how that happened. We all went over there, and I essentially was asked, you know, could you get us in there? And I said, you know, I'm going to talk to one of our allies and friends, MP Charlie Angus. Right. And Charlie, I said, hey, you know, is it possible that Chief Fox could have a discussion with the Minister of Natural Resources? Just as simple as that. He's like, hold on. And he took off, and he came back, and he said, 10 of you. And I told the chief, and he picked out his 10, and I was the only woman involved in that. And I was very honored because I had my iPad, which I used as a camera. And when we walked in, we were like totally searched, like we were going through an airport situation where we had to take everything off. One of the chiefs, who I have a lot of respect for, former Grand Chief Derek Nepanak, was saying, you guys roll out the red carpet for dignitaries, people that are coming from other countries, and yet in our own country, this is how we're treated as, you know, like we're going to do something. He said, you know, this is really disrespectful. And at that time I was told to turn off my camera. So we got in, and we went through, and we were coming down the hall right towards the press gallery. And for me, that was really exciting, because I was thinking, perfect. Like, I didn't even need to call no, you know, news reporters. And here I turned my camera back on, or my iPad, and I was in the procession, and late Elmer Crishane and Elder Nepus, I believe, Cecil from Musquecheese was at the front, and they were holding very sacred things to us, which is the pipe and the wampum belt. Chief Isidore Day was there. and some others that were really important, and they were drumming. Smudge was going, and it was a procession. It was so beautiful. Even thinking about it now just raises the hairs on my arms, because I realized at that moment that this was something that was going to occur in a way that was very, in my mind, significant. And we stood there, and the minister at the time, is Joe Oliver, came out of Parliament. And long story short is that Chief Fox and him ended up, face to face having this discussion. And he was telling him, we want to be involved in these discussions. We need to ensure that our people have safe drinking water, and, there's no free prior informed consent. And anyways, long story short is that he said, well, we are, of course, taking your everything you're saying, and I'll let them know. And he went to go walk in, and I did not know, but at all at once, the chiefs tried to walk into Parliament, literally, and the security came and pushed the elders, and everything was pushed. And all of a sudden it was I don't know if you've ever been, this is now in a mosh pit, but you essentially have to go with the flow. So I literally thought I was going to fall down, because everyone went backwards and then forward. And at that moment, I thought, we're getting arrested. Seriously, I thought at that moment, they're going to take us up. But they just said, they didn't even say anything, or just, it was so much shock, I think. And one of the chiefs, Patrick Madabi, said, if this is the way you're going to treat us, here, you're going to see how you're going to get treated when you come to our lands and territory. And that was that. We turned around, and everyone's seen that on national news. And to this day, I always say that that was a part of the match right across the board, to strike a fire, to light a fire, that a part of the Idle No More movement, because that literally showed a lot of Indigenous people what Canada really thought about what was going on with our natural resources, our land, our water. It was a part of that movement.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find it so incredible that you were part of that moment in time, that moment, that quiet before the storm of I Don't Know More, and all of your involvement with the chiefs, and your support, and with Chief Teresa Spence. And I think that since then, as times have changed, as we've evolved as people, as legislation has been amended, I find it incredible to see this present generation and millennial generation really taking that history forward. And I take pride in that. I take pride in looking at my Indigenous history, learning from incredible people like yourself, the work that they've done, and how can I be a catalyst to bring that forward. So I find that so incredible. And I really hope listeners really took that story in, because that's an incredible moment in time. And I think that whole picture you painted of us just being shoved out of Parliament is still relevant in a certain way today. So I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I think it's fair to say that Nicole Robertson has been part of the resurgence since you started your work. And that resurgence of our Indigenous people rising and thriving and taking strong positions of leadership is so important. So speaking of leadership, what does leadership mean to you, Nicole?
Leadership to me means looking at how this is going to impact the next generation, and not just the next generation, but of course the next 7 generations, looking at how to share space, meaning, platforms that exist, and helping to also make changes where you can, be that person that says enough is enough when you see something that's happening in front of you. And not even just in front of you, because nowadays, it is, you just can't be out in the world as we used to at this point. But looking at ways of trying to be respectful in your dialogue, understanding what comes out of your mouth and what you're keyboarding out into the social media world, that you really read it a second time, that you take an opportunity to really understand the impacts of how you throw rock into the water and the ripple effects that it's going to have. So understanding that and being able to really look at, you know, do I want to help to elevate and support, encourage, or do I want to, you know, you have to really be much more, for me anyways, as a leader, thoughtful in your speaking, and even in your thoughts. We're told that from our elders, you know, before it even becomes a word or language, to know and to understand that it's really important that you check yourself before you wreck yourself. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding.
Nice.
Sorry.
No, it makes sense. Okay, I got a serious question for you, Nicole.
Okay.
Did your mother put spinach in your bannock when you were a young girl? And I say that because the strength that you have as a woman, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, to speak out against an upcoming president of the United States of America and call him out on his racist comments against a U.S. senator, calling her Pocahontas. Where did you get that strength to speak out against racism like that? And what did you learn from that experience?
So, number one, I'd have to say that the strength comes from the Creator, God, you know, whoever you would call your higher power, but I, you know, call him God, Creator. There was prayers that morning. I was working with a family, a nation that had invited me down there to work with the Mandan Hidatsa Rikara, so the MHA nation that is at Fort Berthold. And they, you know, we had said some prayers because he essentially didn't want to meet with any of the tribal leaders out of all the presidential candidates. So they had met with Hillary Clinton, they had met with Bernie Sanders, and he was right in their backyard for a big oil and gas conference, and he essentially didn't. And so I was asked to ask a question at the press conference because I was registered media, whether or not, if he was elected, that he would recognize and implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And of course, at the press conferences in the US, you actually literally have to put your hand up and like, Mr. Trump, you know, like you have to do that. And in Canada, you know, of course, you just yell out your question. And so he had already did the 1-2 and seen that, you know, I was sitting there along with a very beautiful young looking Indigenous woman that was helping me during that time. And so we were sitting there. And so, you know, 3 questions in, he allowed me to ask my question. He essentially looked and said, "Oh yes, I heard about that. We'll look into it." And I knew that he didn't actually either listen or he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So maybe 2 minutes go by. Someone had said, you know, Senator Warren, and he had cut them off, of course, as he's famously known for, you know, just like not even allowing someone to finish their own thoughts. And he had said, "Oh, Pocahontas." And in my mind, I was thinking, are you kidding me? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't even think, you're just in the moment going, you know, excuse me. I don't even know if I put my hand up. I just said, I find that highly offensive. And I realized I said it out loud enough because I was only 3, you know, just really close. And he looked over and I said, "Oh, you know, I'm sorry." I was thinking I interrupted this whole scenario. And he looked down at me, he goes, "Oh," he goes, "I'm sorry." And then he went on and he said, I could be Native American. Look at me. And he literally had grabbed his face and put his cheekbones up like this. And I couldn't believe he doubled down on the whole thing. And it was, to me, like, I thought, this guy's like crazy, you know? And I thought, oh, like, what if he becomes, anyways, you know the rest. He obviously became the leader of that nation. And yeah, I had a lot of hate. I had to get off Twitter. I had to literally get off Twitter right after that, because he had or his people, I don't know if but he just essentially had tweeted out to me saying, this country wasn't built on political correctness, get over yourself. So he had found out that I was, you know, from Canada, and, you know, because they had introduced me as a Native American, you know, writer. And I was essentially, yeah, we don't recognize borders. We have a J treaty, like, you know, yeah. But anyway, so he had tweeted that, and all these people, like, seriously went from, you know, you're a marked Indian to you squaw, who do you think what you're doing, wagon bird, like, they went off. And you have to read that in order to delete it. So I was at first deleting, blocking, you know, trying to keep up with it. And it was just, it was out of control, because, you know, I was on the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journal, to CNN, MSNBC, even Inside Edition had called me to try to get to a television station, but I was already on my way to the airport getting the heck out of America, right? And I was like, yeah, thank goodness. When I got home that following day, I was like almost kissing the ground at YYC, because I was so happy. But anyways, yeah, well, that was quite the experience.
How do you manage your emotions? Like, how did you find balance? And how do you take care of your mental health? I know those are three big questions, but how do you endure that type of hate and those type of comments? Like, what do you do? How did you deal with that?
So to be really honest, within that 24 hours of getting home and, you know, doing a couple more interviews with CTV and CBC in Canada, I completely had a full-on cry, full-on. I needed to get all that emotions, you know, anger, sadness, rage, you know, everything that you would feel when people are trying to attack you. And then at the same time, I thought, you know what, I need to go and release this, and went and put an offering down by the river, close to where I live. And then I had support, of course, from some girlfriends that are really close to talk to, and an elder. And I got through that. And I think, and I look back in time, and it's one of my warrior stories. I think when sometime in the future, if I ever end up getting bestowed with a headdress that, you know, you have to tell your 4 stories, that'll be one of my warrior stories. But nice. Yeah, so now the mental health is like, I think that, you know, just extremely important to be talking to your creator every day. I think that that's where I get a lot of my balance. I know that that's where I get a lot of my balance, and that, you know, making amends when you can. Forgiving is so important. It's tough sometimes when you go through certain things and you feel burned or you feel this and that. But at the end of the day, I think it's about self and taking care of yourself, really coming to terms with looking in the mirror. And, you know, I just shared recently, healing your trauma is a part of political resistance. And so that's like huge for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that. Elaborate. What would that look like? Elaborate on that quote. What would that look like to you? So
looking at your own, say, family trauma, for instance, some of the stuff that maybe you grew up in that you thought was normal isn't, and reconciling it, having those tough discussions with family members, parents, maybe whoever, and trying to move forward from there rather than saying it didn't exist. Right. Yeah, it did exist. And this is how I need to talk to you about it. And if you can't talk to that person, if they're passed on, to write a letter and to just move through it. And there's people that help, help people to do that if you need like help. I'm not ashamed to say I seen a therapist earlier on in my life in my 20s that helped me to get through a place of, being brought up in situations that weren't completely, I would say, what mainstream would call like a normal, household. I was born in the 70s, and in the 80s, we still had much alcoholism happening in communities and families, and, people smoking in vehicles, drinking in cars, that kind of stuff. It was completely what we'd call normal. But nowadays you look at it, you go, holy, like, you just think, how did I survive through some of that stuff? Like no seat belts, like full on, like crazy stuff. I fell out of a moving vehicle when I was like 6, like, and it was only going 10 kilometers. Like it wasn't going, but I still like think to myself, holy, like I miss, like with my own daughter, like full on, like helicopter. She's like, settle down, and it's funny sometimes because I look at it and think to myself, yeah, there's some major shit that we've all gone through in life. And if you can look back and go, you know what, like I helped to make this next generation much more healthier. Like I didn't grow up with powwow. As soon as my daughter was born, as soon as before she can walk, I initiated her with my aunt at the Muckleshoot Nation's powwow. And I didn't grow up in powwow, but I wanted her to understand the very importance of being interconnected with dancing, drumming, understanding her Indigenous roots. So anyways.
That's inspiring. I like, that's such a beautiful thing. And this is what I mean by resurgence, is that this time and era, our young people are growing up with powwow ceremony, their language, as if it was normal. Yeah. It wasn't like that always.
No.
And you're reminding me of this moment where I was at a powwow. I was like a children's powwow in an elementary school. And there was this kid, he couldn't have been any older than 10. Like he was definitely younger than 10 years old. And I'm looking around, and there's all these, like all my relations were there, right? It was all out, the whole school showed up, and some visitors from outside of the school. And I'm looking around, and these kids are in elementary, and I'm like, these kids have the amazing opportunity to grow up with powwow being normal. And I'm like, damn, imagine what their future is going to look like reflecting on this moment here. And then this young boy came out, and he did the opening prayer, and he didn't do like a 30-second prayer. This went on for like minutes in his traditional language. And my mouth was on the ground. I was like, this is the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the era? I couldn't help but recognize that. And I think I have to give thanks to my mother, Cleo Big Eagle, for all of the work she did to make sure I was educated and aware of our history and knowing where we come from. And then, of course, my own personal education journey of all that. But, I just think it's so admirable that you're also making sure that your young daughter, the rise of the sacred feminine, grows up with those teachings, because they ground us, they connect us with the land. And I think Mother Earth is the best religion. I think love is the best religion, in my opinion.
Amen to that, because I absolutely agree with that. I think that it is a beautiful thing to see that, that is the new normal, because to me, that resurgence and what we see that's happening right now, I think that, in the future, they're going to say, oh, that really happened, or we're going to come to a place where hopefully, and that's my hope, is that we don't see color, that we've come back to this place of humility and understanding that we really are all interconnected. Exactly. And that and it's crazy, because I'll tell you really quickly, I was involved in this reality television show called Guess the Relative. And I was brought up so much in my mother's side that my dad was always sort of like that one white guy that was always with all the Indians, right? And I always say that with joking laughter, because he was like from cab driver to like helping to get kids here to there, like full on, like always involved. Really, my dad, I just love him. And I just actually, Father's Day is coming up on National Indigenous Peoples Day this coming Sunday.
Right.
And so I have a lot of respect for him. And I just didn't grow up around a lot of like, you know, understanding my Scottish roots, because of course having the last name Robertson is not like a huge Indigenous name, right? So what happened is I had this opportunity through so Sequin's father, that's my daughter's name, it means spring. And in fact, that's a whole other thing of reconnecting and reclaiming what is our language. And so I got connected through a producer who just happened to, and I just really think it was the creator, because this is something that is not coincidence, wanted to bring somebody to be a part of this international show that was going to be on Sky and their Channel 4 out in London, England. 3 guest relatives from around the world to live with a family from the UK, from England. And so I was selected, and I thought it was a scam at first, to be quite honest, because he was asking me my birthday and all this stuff. And I was like, I'm not doing anything until I see like some kind of like, you know, release form, because I know television, right? So did my homework. They came here, did the backstory, filming me, you know, emceeing National Indigenous Peoples Day, to in the backyard, practicing powwow with my daughter. She was younger back then, to in my kitchen cooking, which I was like laughing because I'm not the best cook, right? I was trying to look like I'm making bannock, really sweating, and
bannock
like
with that spinach in it, right?
Yes, throw some flour on my face and really trying to look the part. I'm kidding. Anyways, but what happened is that I ended up over in England, and this was one of my fears, was getting on a plane and flying for 8 hours, 9 hours to just right off of Turtle Island. And I'd never like done an international flight, so for me that was a huge thing. And anyways, so I got there, I should say, and I moved into this house with other people that I didn't know. We all had our own quarters, and it was the strangest thing, but it was the funniest thing, because in the very first day that I moved there, into the house, and it's like Big Brother, you're like have a lapel mic, and right from the morning to the evening you're switched on, right? So you're like, yeah. So anyways, so I had a deja vu, what some people would call a deja vu, that I was the relative. And at the end of the day, there would be like a light on you, and they'd ask you, so do you think you're the relative, and why, you know, after doing all these different things together? Right. And I said, yeah, no, I'm the relative. I know that I'm the relative. And oh, okay. So the days go on, and we're doing all these things. And I brought my jingle dress and drum and power music on like a CD back then. And I actually put it on and got the producer to blast it really loud. And everyone just like even the production people behind the scenes are like, whoa, you know, like they hadn't heard power music. And so it was just absolutely exhilarating to see people's reaction for the first time when they actually heard powwow. And I was thinking, this is a part of me also like reconciling, you know, like bringing to them, you know, something that was foreign to us, what they brought to us, right? So it was like, it's sort of like full circle for me in that way. But getting back to the story is that at the end of the 10 days of filming and all the different things we did together, first time shooting a gun, I was actually clay pigeons out in pouring rain with some of the guest relatives and relatives, like the family, and some of these Englishmen that were in tweed outfits and completely drinking tea, like total stereotype, right? Of like what an Englishman would like look like. And they were drinking tea, and it was pouring rain. They didn't even have like an umbrella or nothing. And it was fun. It was so fun. But at the end of the 10 days, I was told to go downstairs and to open the big living room doors. And if they were there, then you know, congratulations, you're the relative. If not, then thanks for coming out, you know. And I went down, took a deep breath, opened the doors, and boom, they were there.
Dang.
And I was just like, what? I knew it. And I got to meet my, so our great grandmothers were sisters, and they literally had given me a scroll and showed me like how we were related.
Wow.
And it was just mind blowing,
right,
to actually like get that opportunity, because I never thought that I'd be related to someone that actually was really, you know, like just so embedded in her culture in England, right? And
right.
it just showed me that we're so interconnected, and we're so like, you just don't even know really
right.
when you look at it.
Yeah.
Like, it just shocked me. And so to this day, we keep in touch.
Amazing.
Yeah, and she's full on redhead and
Oh my
great
God.
lady. And anyways,
Amazing story. Amazing. Okay, I have one more question I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
And it's because I admire your work. I admire the doors that you've opened for other Indigenous producers, people in television, all of the work that you've done, and your leadership role. And so I wanted to know, what can men do to help women in positions of leadership?
Heal. I say that with the greatest of respect, you know, like, I'm not saying there's all Indigenous men are not healed. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that your own healing journey to rise up, to warrior up. And that means, you know, looking at those traumas for some. You know, I know from my era of men, Indigenous men, you know, there's been a lot of stumbling blocks that has occurred. And I think it's harder for some men to communicate that, and to come to this place of, you know, reckoning, or coming to this place of, you know, having those discussions. I just know. But I was so happy when I'd seen, you know, back before this happened, you know, Native wellness for men, like a retreat. And I was like, yes, our men need time to get together and to actually have those moments to heal, and to look at those things that, well, yeah, this didn't just happen to me, you know, to understand it. Because as women, we get together with aunties, sisters, you know, we have our cocombs, and we all sit down and talk about things, and some things that get really crazy and wild, as you probably know, from having aunties, and, you know,
so many aunties.
yes. And it's funny. And then other times where it's really like sit down serious, like, you need to, like, this is your role and this is the issue, you know. And there's been tough discussions, you know. And I think that for Indigenous men, I think that once they get over those, just like we as women, get to that place of healing and understanding original self, and unlearning certain things, that they would be just, and I've seen it already, like, look, you know, like, you know, people are much happier when there's all this weight that's lifted off their shoulders, and much more functioning, and, you know, helping. And I think that our men, you know, when we, and this is a discussion that was had with some Indigenous women, it's like, why is there this many missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls? Like, where's our men? Like, what's happened to them? Why aren't they there for us? You know, like, and I don't put it on our men. I think that there's an issue, obviously, with the very upstart, and I can go off on the history of what's happened, of why there's so many, well beyond what is in these reports, you know. But I would say that our men have always been there, and I say that they are much more being more present in this time that we live in. It's getting better, is what I'm trying to say. And I just encourage that. I encourage that our men, essentially, such as yourself, are helping to have these discussions and making it and keeping it real. Because essentially, in each Indigenous language, we all have a name for ourselves that essentially boils down to the real people. So when we are having these discussions, I always think that it's so important to always keep it real, 100%, and keep it open and honest. Because if you can't be that, then, you know, for me, it's like, what's the sense? You know, here I am. Love me or leave me. I'm kidding.
That's real, though. That's keeping it real. For all the men out there, to anybody, all the men that are listening, heal yourself.
Yes.
And that's helping our women. I think that's incredible, Nicole. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your truth. Thank you for sharing your stories. I'm so grateful and full of gratitude to be able to share this experience with you. So again, thank you, Nicole. And I'm sure this won't be the last time that we cross paths. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Justin. And hi. I really appreciate your time, and you are going to be doing some marvelous things. You have a total, absolute knack for this, and I see it. So hi.
Let's work together.
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you, everyone, for, you know, listening and tuning in. I always think to myself, with the audience, when I'm listening to interviews, that it's like, you've taken your time to listen, and thank you. Hi. Thank you, Tiniki.
Much love.
Okay. Take care. See you.